You may have heard of breaking news this morning, a whole series of Security Administration, I'll get that out one of those days. Agents have been arrested for helping ship cocaine around the country. Yeah, these are the same people who grope little old ladies in line. Um, the rent-a-cops working at many of these airports. We've got to have a better approach to this, folks. 921, Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310, KLIX, and newsradio1310.com. I did not have to scrape ice from my windshield this morning, first time this week. On the other hand, I will again tomorrow morning because we're going to drop below freezing. We're not out of the winter yet. We want to remind you, if you have problems with your heating system at home, you've got to get somebody out, take a look at it so you can at least get it running efficiently and save some money on heating costs. Call the pros at Ramsey Heating and Electric in Burley. They'll come out, they'll get the job done right, and they'll get it done right the first time. Problem-free, cozy winters are found at Ramsey Heating and Electric, 2600 Overland Avenue in Burley. The telephone number is 678-0459. That's 678-0459. Ramsey Heating and Electric, where they sell warm winters and cool summers. We have a caller with us. Caller, you're up next. You're on the air on KLIX at 923.
The left, the resistance is, I find that they are inconsistent. They have a poor work ethic, and their resolve will drain away after a while. Now, you wonder how many of them are getting paid to protest and raise hell, and how many of them are just useful idiots. And you never really know for sure, but you see it is a battle. And I think that I heard that clip about the country splitting in half. I just don't think the left really has the resolve in the end to hang in there long enough to do it. I know there's certain factions of it that are so motivated by whether or not it's belief or they're got money in the deal, they will. But all of the workers, they will be inconsistent, and as the summer comes, it will drift away as a non-priority, I think. And then parenting, I've said this numerous times on your program. I have 11 kids, 14 grandchildren, maybe 15. I'm not sure yet. And you see, if you're a weak-kneed father and you're afraid to upset your children, you will get children that don't have any resolve. You've got to find yourself and at least do what you can do for your own family. Thanks, Bill.
Hey, thank you. There was a fellow named Bob Ehrlich who was, Larry Hogan is the Republican governor of Maryland at the moment. Larry Hogan, good guy. I've known him for a number of years. Used to be a regular guest on my radio program back on the eastern shore of the Chesapeake. People were stunned when he won election to that seat because Maryland is so deep blue. On the other hand, if you look back at it, Martin O'Malley had been the governor. Prior, he was a Democrat, but before him was a guy named Bob Ehrlich. Bob Ehrlich was a Republican, and Bob Ehrlich also sometimes guest on my radio program when I worked back there. Bob Ehrlich has a piece at Washington Examiner today where he said the one thing the left does really well, boycotts. In other words, boycotting, members of Donald Trump's family who have business interests, boycotting. He said the only time that probably they failed was Chick-fil-A. I mean, I have a friend who is gay and told me one time, he said, I would prefer to eat at Chick-fil-A more than anywhere else. I said, why is that? He said, because the food's good. And that trumps the boycott, right? No pun intended when we're talking about the Trump family. But Ehrlich says the American right doesn't do those things. The American right sends letters and praise, but he said we don't do a lot of the activism like the other side does. Now, I said yesterday, if you toss these liberals who are out in the streets smashing windows and setting fires, if you toss them a hacky sack, they'll forget all about the rioting. That'll keep them occupied for hours on end. It's the only thing other than a video game that will. But Ehrlich is onto something, and I know that when I was first getting involved with the Tea Party movement years ago, nearly a decade ago, actually I was in a proto-Tea Party organization going back into the early part of the last decade, early to mid part of the last decade. It was called the Patriot League of Central New York. That was an area that included Syracuse and Utica and some of the other Rust Belt cities in that part of the country. and we got involved in all of this. But we were trying to convince people that they had to get out to borrow a page from the left and be seen. And not we weren't smashing windows. You're not going to set fires, but you had to get your posters out and you had to get out into the street. And when the Tea Party movement really got rolling in 2009, I can remember being at a meeting where I was talking about we had a real ne'er do well who was serving in the local state legislature, liberal Democrat, and he was just about the most opportunistic fellow you ever met. And I said, well, you know what we need to do? We should have a picket on his street, going up and down the street outside his house. And some woman stood up and said, we're not protesters, as if being a protester was a bad thing. It's not like I said, let's all grow our hair out long, put on some beads, walk barefooted, smoke dope, and spout communism. I just said, we have a peaceful demonstration with picket signs up and down his street. Why? Because it draws attention from media. Now, media has gotten to the point where it ignores some of these demonstrations because it doesn't want to report on them. Or, as I said last week, they try and come out and they take a picture of one person who's on the fringe of your organization who shows up with a sign and they try to portray that as being your entire organization. The fact of the matter is, and I go back to the analogy, Sonny Werblin, who owned the New York Jets in the 1960s. Sonny Werblin told his public relations office one day, he said, if Tobin Rote, who was a journeyman quarterback, if Tobin Rote has a big game tomorrow, I'm going to give him a $200,000 contract. And they were astounded. They said, he's not a very good player. Yeah, but I'm going to give him a $200,000 contract if he is. And that was a lot of money in the early to mid 1960s. And somebody said, well, why would you do that? He said, because big money is big news. He knew in his competition with the New York Giants, who were the crosstown team, that he needed to get some front page coverage. So people would say, gee, what's the deal with this new football team? And they might come out and see it. It's the same idea with demonstrations. The American right, we're still, as a conservative, we're not comfortable going out and doing these things in the streets. And when we do have organizations that do, and I think like the local Act for America chapter and some of these other organizations do that extremely well, but when they do it, they know that they're going to have to deal not only with the opposition on the American left or the local left, but they're going to have to deal with the opposition from the newspapers and the television stations as well. Because in the mind of these newsrooms, liberal good, conservative bad. And that's simply something we have to factor in, and it's going to be there and it's going to be with us for a very, very long time. Because we're not going to change the cultures of the media anytime soon. The president is trying to push them that way, and the pushback is astronomical. We're going to talk about that coming up in the next half hour. Piers Morgan, once again, and he's a liberal, ripping into liberal American media during an appearance with Sean Hannity on Fox last night. If you didn't hear it, you've got to. I'll share that with you coming up in just a few minutes. In the meantime, short break. Also wanted to thank our friends from Trip Family Medicine for joining us in studio yesterday. They'll be back next week, Wednesday, between 8:30 and 9 o'clock. We do this every Wednesday morning during that time slot. It's your opportunity to actually get a little medical advice and actually ask a question or two from one of the medical professionals. It won't cost you a cent. Dr. Tripp's office is still looking for new patients, and they can often see you on the very same day if you call up with a medical issue in the morning. I wanted to point out the office is located on Fillmore Street in Twin Falls, directly across from the main post office. And remember, life's too short not to feel good. Music for a small town. America was a lot better place in those small towns when I was a kid. 9:34, Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310, KLIX, and newsradio1310.com. 41. Piers Morgan, liberal. I don't think anybody out there has any doubts about it. He's for gun control and gun confiscation, and after he got fired by CNN, he went back to England and lives there mainly and afflicts the people in that country. But Morgan says, at least when it comes to journalism, you have to be fair. And he's been on a crusade the last couple of weeks, appearing on various TV programs in this country, saying mainstream media has lost all control when it comes to covering Donald Trump. Morgan appeared last night with Sean Hannity on Fox News Channel, and he scorched mainstream media for its coverage of Trump.
There is an absolutely frenzied and concerted attempt to delegitimize, sabotage and destroy the Trump presidency before it's even started. I think that is un-American. I don't think it's a patriotic thing that they're doing. I think it's nakedly partisan. It's driven by the New York Times, who were completely in the tank for Hillary Clinton. And I think that as a journalist who worked at CNN for 4 years, where CNN always tried to be, I know your view about CNN, but has a lot of good people there. I think they've got to be careful, all of them. They've got to look at what they're doing here and ask themselves, is this legitimate journalistic rigor, or is it incredibly partisan, often nakedly abusive treatment of a new president? And I think, I'm afraid, it's bordering on the latter. This Russian scandal, when you play some journalists who I completely respect, when you play them talking about this being the new Watergate, being Pearl Harbor, 9/11, you know, the biggest scandal since Iran-Contra and so on, this is a wildly exaggerated view as the facts currently stand. The facts are there is nothing right now to link Donald Trump to any collusion with anyone from Russia in relation to the American election.
Piers,
nothing.
I gotta tell you.
He closed by saying "niet," but Russian for no. Let's just put it into this perspective. Mainstream media is covering for an unelected bureaucracy, this shadow government, this deep government. Various names are coming out about the people who actually run this, which is very anti-republic, very anti-democracy. Media now is working to protect these people who are bankrupting this country and taking your liberties away. Media it's been screaming all week about Donald Trump calling on conservative media, his press secretary at news conferences. So it dang well wants to protect its First Amendment liberty, but it doesn't want to protect any of yours. Well, we've known that with the Second Amendment for a long time. Couple of notes on this whole departure of General Flynn this week. We're starting to learn more and more. It looks as if nothing criminal happened. It looks as if Flynn did not discuss sanctions with the Russians before he actually took office. I've got this. This is from pjmedia.com. Writer Michael Walsh. This story, he says, from January 12th, this was last month, from the New York Times, was little remarked upon at the time, but suddenly has taken on far greater significance. And this is what the story said. In its final days, the Obama White House expanded the power of the National Security Agency to share globally intercepted personal communications with the government's 16 other intelligence agencies before applying privacy protections. In other words, the NSA is handing this out to other unelected bureaucrats who then, and it's 16 other agencies, that means there are perhaps thousands of people who can then go share these stories and be one of the infamous leakers trying to destroy the Trump White House. The story went on to say Attorney General Loretta Lynch signed the new rules permitting the NSA to disseminate, quote, raw signals intelligence information, unquote, after the Director of National Intelligence, James Clapper, signed them on December 15, according to a 23-page largely declassified copy. This is not expanding the substantive ability of law enforcement to get access to signals intelligence, said Robert S. Litt, the General Counsel of Mr. Clapper. It is simply widening the aperture for a larger number of analysts who will be bound by the existing rules. The writer Michael Walsh says, throwing the BS flag on this one, widening the aperture? Huh? So in other words, they were already plotting this takedown of Michael Flynn, and this goes back to the Obama White House when it fired him when he had objections with the Iranian nuclear deal. Investors Business Daily has this. President Trump may have come to Washington to drain the swamp, but now he's finding out that it's full of nasty swamp creatures, and he's also discovered they bite. The media have been slobbering at the chance to slip their chains and take a bite out of Trump, who has so far bested them in Twitter. Meanwhile, federal bureaucrats fearing Trump's vow to shrink big government and root out corruption are digging in as if fighting for their very lives. And I've got more on this. The writer goes on to say bigger than Watergate, with a question mark, and says no one quite knows what these contacts were, but even the New York Times admitted that Flynn, when he had that conversation with a Russian counterpart, there is no evidence of a crime. So why are we dealing with New York Times columnists like Thomas Freakman, claiming it's bigger than Watergate and it's bigger than Pearl Harbor? Yeah, well, if he wants to fight the Russians, give him a pop gun and tell them it's over there across the ocean. You go right ahead. 20 minutes. Hi, I'm an American liberal and I'm kind of on the doughy side. I'm here to stand up to you. But first, let's have a glass of Cabernet Sauvignon and maybe I can sleep with all the men in your country. You may have also heard this morning, if you were checking various news sources, the Wall Street Journal has an exclusive. Well, I guess it's no longer an exclusive. Everyone else and their brother has picked it up. Apparently, there are people inside the U.S. intelligence community who are not providing intelligence to President Trump. He's the boss. He's the commander-in-chief of the armed forces. And this country has been, a caller said yesterday, he said, we've been on a perpetual war footing my entire life. And that's true. We go back to the Cold War era and some of the brush wars we were fighting throughout that era. Now we've been in the 9/11 era for the last, well over 15 years. So Mr. Trump is therefore the commander-in-chief of the armed forces, and he has to make decisions, some very big decisions on who are the bad guys and who are the good guys. And now you've got people who are refusing to share intelligence. He's the boss, for crying out loud. Alan West was writing in his column last night that this is just simply treasonous. You know, if you had to go in and fire everybody in the intelligence community, the liberals would complain and say, well, now you're getting rid of all of that experience. But most of us know that you've had a family member, most of us know somebody who's dealt with cancer. Sometimes when the doctors are removing the cancerous cells, they also have to take some healthy tissue with it. It may well be that we have to clean house, and whether we're taking some of the good guys out in these agencies or whether we're taking out some of the bad guys, we got to take them all out to ensure that we get rid of the bad guys. Because what's going on, I think, is much more dangerous than if we have to bring in new people and train them in the art of intelligence. It's 9:44. Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News. And I would bet if you bring in a guy like Alan West, that he could probably help you out by bringing along people he trusts who could actually get the job done and do it well. People that he already knows. And you wouldn't be dealing with this because what else would you call it but treason? 9:44. Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310, KLIX and newsradio1310.com. Over at the Washington Times, a writer named Angelo Codavilla. He says the CIA has denied a security clearance to Trump National Security Council official Robin Townley without any allegation, much less evidence of disloyalty. Quite simply, it's because the CIA disapproves of Mr. Townley's attitude toward the agency. Hence, if Mr. Trump does not fire forthwith the persons who thus took for themselves the prerogative that the American people had entrusted to him at the ballot box, chances are 100% that they will use that prerogative ever more frequently with regard to anyone else whom they regard as standing in the way of their preferred policies. I was hired a number of years ago to be a program director at a radio station. That meant I was the boss. And I can remember I came in and I was setting down some ground rules when a woman who was one of our newsreaders, she wasn't even the news director, one of our newsreaders, started lipping off to me. Oh, I'm not going to do that. We're not going to. And I looked at her and I said, excuse me, I'm the program director and you're going to do it. Dead silence. I never heard another bit of lip from that woman again in that workplace. And I'm telling you, Mr. Trump is the boss. He is the president of the United States. And these agencies work for him. You may not like him. You may not agree with his policies. Then there's the door. That's actually quoting Alan West. He was giving a speech in the early Tea Party days. If you go to YouTube and you look up something called Alan West at the Revolution, it's a 6-minute impromptu speech he gave. And it'll just blow you away. It'll knock your socks off and leave you standing in your shoes. Because he's telling these people, if you're not on board with a change in this country, there's the door. So you cannot continue to accept a salary from the United States taxpayers when you are insubordinate. That's not how it works. And he does have the right to come in and clean house at this point. I've got this from the Daily Caller. Daily Caller was talking to some retired intelligence officials. One by the name of Colonel James Williamson. He was a 32-year Special Forces veteran who coordinated operations with intelligence. His comments about what happened to General Flynn, quote, "This was a hit job," unquote. Noting the Obama White House first tried to silence Flynn as long as 3 years ago when the former president fired him as director of the Defense Intelligence Agency, Williamson called Monday's resignation, quote, "Stage 2 of Kill Mike Flynn," unquote. Quote, "The knives are out," unquote, said Frederick Rustman, who retired after 24 years from the CIA's clandestine service and was a member of its elite senior intelligence service. The intelligence community's sprawling bureaucracy is organizing to topple the Trump presidency, Rustman charged in an interview with the Daily Caller News Foundation. That's page 1. This goes on for 3 pages of these retired agency operatives who are all backing this up and saying that this was indeed an opportunity to get rid of somebody who was a thorn in the side. Now, the Obama White House left a lot of these people behind, and once again, they've got to be pushed out. This is from Alan West's column, which I referenced a couple of minutes ago. He writes, "Did the Obama White House know and authorize the phone tapping involving an American citizen without their knowledge? As we know, the exact same thing happened with the Obama Department of Justice under Eric Holder, investigating the sitting CIA director, General David Petraeus, without his knowledge." And then Mr. West writes, or Colonel West writes, "I wonder if the liberal ACLU has any issue with that." Of course not, because he's not a fellow traveler. West says it would seriously behoove President Trump to remove the countless number of Obama holdovers that remain operating within his administration in key positions. Herein lies the real story that the mainstream, complicit liberal progressive media isn't going to report. Imagine if President George W. Bush set up a shadow effort to undermine the incoming Obama White House national security team. And then West says, "I recall the childish antics of the outgoing Clinton White House to remove all the W keys from the computer keyboards. This is far more egregious, nefarious, and in my estimation, treasonous," Colonel West writes. Nothing new, though, for the Obama flying monkeys. 9:48. Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. Dr. Sebastian Gorka, who works inside the White House as an advisor on security issues to Mr. Trump, was making an appearance last night, speaking, and he was a long-time guest on Fox News, now working for the government, telling Sean Hannity that Russia does have some mutual interests with the United States, and if you'd like to complain about people working with the Russians in the past, don't look at Michael Flynn. Look at some of the other characters who were involved during the Obama White House years.
I think the best answer to that is the president's own words. Do you remember he gave a press conference, one of his last press conferences from Trump Tower, where somebody asked him the question about you and Putin and so on and so forth, and he was super blunt. He said, "Look, I'd like to be able to work with Vladimir Putin. I don't think it's going to happen, and if it doesn't, so be it." But there are, of course, some common interests. They've suffered from jihadi terrorism, as have we. But if you look at what they've done in Crimea, you look at the way they were facilitated. They weren't stopped by the Obama administration from invading another country. You look at the way how our UN ambassador now has categorically attacked that aggression, that occupation. It's ironic, isn't it, that the last administration that whispered to Medvedev, that had their own reset button, that saw Secretary Clinton approve the sale of 20% of our uranium to Russia, that they're not the ones that created the problem, but we are. I've learned one thing in the last 3.5 weeks, Sean. 80% of what you read in the media is 180 degrees out of whack with reality.
And you know what? Media doesn't face any controls. In government, you do something wrong, you can lose your job. You can be prosecuted. In every other walk of life in this country, you step over those boundaries, you can lose your job. In government, you would face a congressional hearing. You step out of line here in the state of Idaho, they take away your committee assignments. Media, on the other hand, is running what you might call a propaganda effort for the American left. Media faces no such penalty. And then they happen to whine. I was reading a comment from a writer this morning. The whining going on because Mr. Trump's people will not call on liberal media during press conferences, although Spicer did one day this week mix it up a bit. Media not telling you that, but angry that the Trump White House is calling. One of them called it. One of these liberals from CNN, might have been Jim Acosta, said, "Well, this is an assault on the First Amendment." According to whom? They can call on anybody they like, and they can mix it up any way they like. The fact of the matter is, over at MSDNC, they've been likening Mr. Trump to Hitler. In fact, now you've got Chris Matthews referring to Trump and his family as the Romanovs, as if they're the last czar in his family. Why would you in any way want to talk to somebody who keeps saying you're Hitler or you're a czar? I wouldn't. We have a caller with us. It's 9:52. You're listening to News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. This is Top Story. The telephone number 736-0300. Caller, you're up next. You're on the air.
Good morning. I'm from out of town, but just have your get to your station. It sounds like you're one of us. Is that correct?
Meaning one of us by what? In what sense?
Well, you think of the Constitution and all these other things. In other words, you're a conservative, I would say, offhand. But this Obama deal. This man is the most hateful man that I've seen or heard of in a long time. He's fortified his house, so it's like a fort in the old days, cowboys and Indians. And then he's got 100,000 people out there on his staff trying to destroy America. What are your thoughts on that?
Still trying to destroy America. That's the thing. They haven't gone anywhere. They they left these little almost landmines through the new government, and now apparently they're working in collusion with George Soros and people on college campuses across the country to burn this country down because they didn't get what they wanted.
Well, you're absolutely right. I'm glad there's still people around like you because I live in Burley, but I'm wintering in Las Vegas, and I just came home for a doctor's appointment. But down there, you don't say anything because those people are so leftist that it's unreal.
Yeah, Clark County is really though an aberration. The rest of Nevada, I assume, is very conservative, but it's the fact of the matter is you've got so many people there with the SEIU and working illegally and the like. They've been promised the moon, sun, and stars by liberals, and as I was mentioning earlier in the show, you've got people out there that are like little kids at the grocery store. They want the candy in the checkout aisle. You tell them no, and they get angry. Well, they better learn the meaning of no because we're $20 trillion in debt. We can't keep giving everybody everything they want.
I thought that analogy that was given earlier, I think it was by you, that about the kid breaking his toy and then wanting to blame everybody else for it. That is such a good analogy of what's going on. And these people really believe that they're in the right. That's the problem. You cannot reason with a true liberal.
No. They put their hands over their ears if you try because they don't want to hear something that might damage their belief system.
Yeah, and it's just, like I say in Las Vegas, unions are very, very strong there, and all the hotels are unionized and everything, and it's very hard for a Republican to get elected in Clark County.
Well, I think that if things continue the way they're going and these people decide they're going to leave the union and go their own way, within 10 years they'll all be crying, trying to come back in and ask everybody else to pay off their bills. Thank you much for the call. I've got to run to the next caller. We've got time, I think, to squeeze at least one more voice in this morning. 41, you're up next on Top Story with Bill Colley. Go ahead.
Hi, Bill.
Yes, go ahead. You're on the air.
Hi. I was calling in. Last week you were talking with, I believe, a representative from the state legislature about being able to exceed the speed limit passing on the interstate or on two-lane roads. One thing that I've thought for a long time, all automobiles, minimum, everyone that I've ever seen, minimum cruise control setting is 25 miles per hour. most school zones are 20 miles per hour. And I
Yeah.
see a lot of people looking down, and I do this, looking down to make sure I don't speed instead of having my eyes up looking for kids.
That's a good point.
So,
My Jeep, which is
so
about 10 years old, I have to set it at about 26 to actually get cruise control to work when I'm going through, like, let's say I'm going through downtown Shoshone, you've got to slow down to 25. It was only
yeah,
when I bought the new car a couple of months ago that it seems to be able to set below 25. But you're right. You almost have to, the old joke from the comedian Bill White, he was asked why he was speeding on the bridge to Sanibel Island, which has a speed limit of 5, and he was arrested for going 10, I think, and he said, I took my foot off the brake.
yeah, yes, certainly. But I think that would be if it was standardized 25 miles per hour, or if the auto industry brought the cruise control setting, the lowest minimum cruise control setting down to 20 or 15, whatever it is, just so I think that would save a lot of accidents. And it's accidents. I'm not worried about, speeding tickets. I'm worried about not seeing kids. And I have 3 that make school crossings every day. So,
Yeah, I think that's a good point, and hopefully we'll get a chance to talk to Representative Clow about the law sometime in the next few weeks, because and then he can maybe expand on that because he is, of all the legislators I've met in Idaho, he is the most up to speed on all transportation and highway issues. So we should have an opportunity to bring some of this up. Thank you for the call. I and I have to admit, I try and avoid. I actually went out and drove past 2 schools the other day, and I did drive slowly because I stopped in both cases so I could take pictures of the schools because I was using the pictures to illustrate something at our website. But I got to be honest, I try my best to avoid school zones just simply because caller's right. You're trying to drive at 20 or below, and just to ensure it, you're looking down at the speedometer and you're not looking at the street. We've got to take a short break, and then it's Rush Limbaugh. Actually, a long break for me, 22 hours. God willing, if the creek don't rise, I'll be back here tomorrow morning between 8 and 10 o'clock. Also wanted to mention gun talk tomorrow morning, and we may actually be talking about the Castle Doctrine. We're trying to get Christy Zitto, the sponsor of that bill, on the air with us during the course of that hour.